So what is racial discomfort, Elizabeth?
Well, I define racial discomfort as an intellectual, emotional, and physical response to that we experience when issues of race are brought up, and it can be in any context. And the issues can involve, recognizing racial differences, inequities, institutional versus individual racism, or subtle or overt racism. And I think the racial discomfort is often exacerbated when people of different races come together.
And I think for me, racial discomfort happens when there are two different perspectives in the same room, and they don't necessarily share the same perspective, right? So there's two different perspectives. It often happens in silence. They actually don't know that there is a difference, and so the tension comes when someone will say something, and there is some reaction in the room, and it could be silent. It could be something that's hard to detect, but maybe you feel it, or maybe a seasoned professor can sense it, or knows that comment would have a certain impact. Where the speaker, who may represent themselves, or maybe several or many people in the classroom, says something that makes sense to them, but is interpreted from a whole different perspective by other people in the classroom. And that's where the tension emerges, because that difference, I think, sometimes feels unsafe.
I think the discomfort can also be rooted in not knowing. And so when we don't know why the other person may have a different response or a different perspective, not understanding that difference or can jar us and cause us to feel that sense of discomfort.
That's right. And I think there's at least two sides to this. I think racial discomfort, if we're talking about the awkwardness or even the feeling of vulnerability or wound, and all of these things are happening, I think there's at least two sides to it. One is the side of being the wounded. Someone has said something has happened where I feel now unsafe, I feel now outnumbered, I feel like I'm not appreciated or protected in this environment. And the other is the feeling of being the wounder, a feeling of guilt and uncertainty about that. Have I said the wrong thing? Have I wounded somebody? I don't know. And that can lead to all kinds of other emotions like resentment and defensiveness, and just deep guilt that can be afflicting.
Right. I think often too, in a classroom situation, we don't take the emotional, we meaning educators don't take the emotional and the physical aspects of the discomfort into consideration, or we're not keenly aware. So I think it's important to recognize that when people feel emotional and physical discomfort about these difficult, complex topics, then they can just completely shut down.
Right. That's right. I think one of the interesting things about racial discomfort, too, is the multiplicity of forms it comes in, and this is why it's so important. So few of us are really trained in this, and some of us get the training, some of us get it through practice and just experience, but it can be anything from an emotional outburst, of whether that's anger or tears, or people storming out of the classroom, to something very subtle and that looks innocent and is even very silent. And so the question for us is, I think, how to recognize those moments, each in their turn, and how to know how to deal with it for those, especially those who aren't used to it, those who are, in other words, uncomfortable. Well, the title is Engaging Racial Discomfort in the Classroom. We've also used a different phrase, which is leaning into racial discomfort. And so both concepts are important and related, but slightly different. The idea, I think, of leaning in is this idea that when awkward moments happen, when racial discomfort happens in the classroom, you don't back off from it. You don't try to fix it necessarily. You embrace it. You embrace the discomfort, and you embrace the emotional awkwardness in very healthy ways and figure out how, I think a word we've used is redirect it into something very constructive. So I think this is our overall theme, but what we do is...
Well, we'll have a panel of 5 faculty members, and each from different disciplines.
That's right.
And then also different subject positions, so we'll have different perspectives and different insights from our lived experience as educators to bring to the discussion. So what we want to do is we want to model a scenario
Right.
of racial discomfort in the classroom. And so we'll have a conversation among ourselves, and part of it will be to reveal how our subject position and our lived experience frames our discussions in the classroom or our instruction. And
We're modeling how one would engage with racial discomfort in the classroom by introducing a scenario.
that's right. Yeah.
And of something that has happened in the classroom. It's a hypothetical, but we've all dealt with versions of this. And we'll each give our perspectives. And, we are offering tools. They're not comprehensive, but they are tools, guidelines that people can follow that we've used, nor do we assume that they're all right or apply equally or as
Right.
well to everyone.
Right.
But we're saying how we would deal with it, and we expect some disagreement within the panel. It's a panel of 5 professors. And from there, we're going to move on to then groups. There will be tables throughout the room, and people will work in groups of anywhere, I guess, from 4 or 5 to 8, however many fit.
And so that's the workshop portion
Right.
in which the participants will also work through a scenario of racial discomfort in the classroom that they develop, and then they'll work through, and then we'll have a large group such a time in which folks then report on their findings in the small group, as well as share takeaways
That's right.
from the session.
Right, yep.
I think the takeaway will vary depending on the participant, and it will depend on where that person is in the journey of multicultural and diversity knowledge and competence. So for me, it'll be interesting to learn what the takeaways will be. But I hope one of the insights that people will gain is that we are all on a journey in terms of racial identity development, and so to respect that people are at different points along that path, and that it's a lifelong process of discovery.
That's right.
And rethinking our ideas about race, ourselves and people of other racial groups, and our individual and collective histories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't really know until we see.
Right.
We know what we want. We know we want people to engage in what we're doing. But I do hope one of the takeaways is to know that it's okay to make mistakes.
Right, right.
That I think there's a lot in the diversity courses that we teach on campus. I think there's some students who feel because it's a requirement, because maybe they're not inclined to take it anyway, that they're being somehow forced, that there's some kind of rule book, the way that you have to behave. And that actually, in some ways, is the exact opposite of what we're trying to get across in this, which is that the only way to learn how to engage with these very sensitive issues is to make mistakes. That is the learning process, right? We're not in the business of just assessing students. We're in the business of learning together. And so the only way one can learn is to try, to fail, to try again. And
Right, and that journey of self-discovery and learning about others is a lifelong one, and I think it's not one that anyone masters.
That's
so we're all here to learn from one another as well.
that's right. Absolutely.
So the theme is moving from inclusion to engagement.
Yeah, I personally love it. I think this idea of engagement is where it's at. And I've often made the joke that the old ethos of teaching tolerance, I've said this to you, teaching tolerance is a very low bar, right? We tolerate noxious smells. And that's not something that I want to aspire to as a society. I want to engage with people, right? I want to learn how to really interact and dialogue with people and learn how to love and appreciate who they are and where they come from. That takes work, that takes listening, that takes mistake making.
Right, I would agree with that. I think the inclusion part is a mindset, and the engagement denotes action. So it's moving from mindset or attitude to action. And I think in light of the events on the the unhappy events on our campus last spring, as well as demographic changes in the country, so that by 2040 we will no longer have a racial majority in this country. So I think this engagement, dialoguing, learning from one another, valuing and respecting one another's experiences, histories, is not only important but critical.
Critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And making us all more effective citizens in the 21st century. It's a realization that not everyone is along the same part of along the same point of the journey, so that for some folks, they're having a paradigm shift in their thinking or an attitude, adjustment, mindset change. That will be the biggest impact of the Campus Diversity Forum. And then for others who are more ready, then moving into action and engagement, maybe
Yeah.
right, appropriate for them.
Absolutely, yeah. The only, I guess I would add, that great quote, the great quote from Rilke, the German poet, live the questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the things that are unsolved in your heart are really what life is about. We don't know the answers, we don't need to know them. I think the idea of engagement is all about that, because when you engage with somebody, you have to be open to the unfinished, the unformed, because that's how we define dialogue, two people encountering each other. And if we can get to that point without worrying about perfection
Right.
and resolution, I think we'll be much, much better off.